And joining me now is somebody I've long admired when as a New York Times contributor, but she's now a daily podcaster for the Crooked Media folks, Pod Save America folks. It's called What a Day. It's Jane Coaston. Jane, good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you as well.
So when we last, you were, tell me about your media, your professional media resume these days. Because we're all, look, as I joke, I don't like to bet roulette, but if I ever get forced to bet roulette, I always put a chip on four corners, right, to increase the amount of opportunities I have for a number to hit. And I feel like that's the world of journalism now, that everybody in this space is doing like 3 or 4 jobs because they're not sure which one's going to become the job, right? Which one's going to become the true anchor of their life. Are you a living embodiment of this yourself?
I am less so than I was previously. Now, like this is what I do. This is what I do.
This is what
I'm
you do.
also
All right.
a New York Times contributor, but especially because I come into the office. I am speaking to you from the beautiful Crooked Media office in Los Angeles in West Hollywood, near where I live. And so it's probably the most day-to-day normal job I've had since before the pandemic, probably. So that's been nice. So I am the
very
host
set
of
schedule. I mean, because that's the thing. People ask me, how do you like this world? And I said, well, I was a very scheduled person. Now I have a little bit more control of that schedule, and sometimes that's anxiety driven.
Yes, I do like the fact that in general, like my schedule's pretty set. Because as we were talking about, I'm on Pacific time. There are a couple things where we can move stuff around in a way that I don't think would be as easy to do if we were on the East Coast. But yeah, it's pretty set. I'm here.
Is this your first time living on West Coast?
It is my first time living on the West Coast.
So you've been mostly a Central East Coast person?
Yeah, mostly. I grew up in Ohio, lived in Ohio, Michigan, Missouri, and then moved to D.C., 13 years in D.C., and then I moved to Utah.
So you've done every time zone. You've got all 4 major time zones.
I've been in pretty much every time zone. Big fan, by the way, if we're talking time zones, Mountain, highly underrated.
I completely agree. I lived for a brief period in Boulder, Colorado during my period in between college and life. And there is no better sports experience.
It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect because
Mountain.
Pacific time.
Oh, I'm with you.
You do have
too early, Mountain. Too early. That 9 a.m. kickoff.
9 a.m. kick is
for
tough.
College football.
That has been. That's the one thing where.
You're a Michigan fan.
I'm a Michigan fan. So
they're
it's
all
always
noon
a noon
kickoffs.
cook.
Yeah,
it's always
the big 9 a.m. kickoff. Yeah.
It's always a noon kick, and that's really
brutal.
10 a.m. though. 10 a.m. I can do.
You've had your cup of coffee. You've probably already had a little nosh. Maybe you've read. You're read in on the day. You're sort of
I know what's going on.
Yeah.
But I do think it is nice that I can have the entire emotional experience of a college football game and have it be over by 12:30. And then I do get that, I obviously, RIP
and the late night
games
and the late night games are done by 8:39. You can go out for a late dinner.
Yeah, I could watch, I watched that Cal Miami game that ended very confusingly.
I probably was the only East Coast person that stayed up.
No, that was there's
thing.
a real, even though they have, I was saying RIP to the Pac-12, but you can't get rid of the Pac-12 after dark energy. Like there's just something that happens if you're and I think that's, one of my favorite things about college football is watching a game, especially a night game, being able to watch that at 6 p.m. my time. One of my favorite college football games of this past year was Kansas State at BYU.
Oh, that was a good one. That was the 2 Hail Marys? Where it felt like...
I have never seen... I joked that it was like Kansas State's quarterback had just descended into hell for about 4.5 minutes. Like, everything that could possibly go wrong. If I remember correctly, there was a pick six, then a fumble six, then something else terrible happened. And it was like the fact that this Kansas State's quarterback, who's actually pretty good, kept going onto the field. I was like, that's why you're a gamer and I am not. Because I would have just been like, there's something wrong.
No, that Kansas State quarterback was good enough that they asked Will Howard to go into the transfer portal.
Yes, they did. And it's just like, so it's nice to be able to get to see moments like that and have it still
Mhm.
be like 7 p.m., 8 p.m. my time.
I was not
That
going to
is
bring
very
up college
enjoyable.
football until till later, but I am curious. Do you feel like you yet have a feeling about whether college football has hurt itself collectively by essentially destroying the with the Big Ten and SEC destroying the Pac-12?
Um, I think that I'm of two minds. I think that any prediction people make about football and saying like this will happen, this is going to destroy the sport, I
Hmm.
don't think they understand how durable the sport can be and how people feel about the sport.
I agree with that.
You and I are both college football lovers.
I'm going to keep it up like it does. I
Like
know that
I
the
have now
rules are
been through.
rigged. I now know the rules are going to be rigged against any teams not in the SEC and the Big Ten, and yet I'm still going to
Right. And it's going to be,
be and
they're going
moan
to
about it.
expand the
Yeah.
playoff and that's going to get weird. I mean,
Hmm.
the playoff itself is weird, but I think that there's the inherently chaotic energy of college football cannot be confined or,
Yeah.
in any way, it will always be chaos in a truly wonderful way. And I think that, the thing I am actually concerned about in terms of football, not how I feel about it, but how the players feel about it is that by making these super conferences where
Mhm.
you have the Big Ten now contains teams at the University of Washington, Oregon, USC. This is great for me personally.
Mhm.
Michigan's coming to play at USC this season, and I'm
Mhm.
like, great, I could. That is a 25-minute drive on like a good day. That's like an easy trip for me. It kind of reminds me of when I would go when I lived in DC and Maryland was in the Big Ten. Maryland
Yes.
is in the Big Ten, and I could take the Metro and go watch Michigan beat the shit out of Maryland and like take the
Right.
Metro home. It was great.
Right.
But from a player perspective, and I would say that this is also like I am a fan of a school with money. I'm a
Right.
fan of a school with a lot of money.
Same with me.
So
Both Miami
they,
and Michigan are playing in the big leagues, and
yeah,
that does help
they have
us.
money,
Yeah.
and so them taking players, especially football, basketball, they are going to be able to take all of those grad assistants who help,
Mhm.
monitor testing, all of the stuff that can make being a college athlete possible. They're going to be able to do that pretty much from anywhere. But there are a lot of schools, smaller schools, that are now in environments where one, like, most athletic programs lose money. They just do. Like
Right.
most college football team. It's not in like having a college football team is very expensive and usually
Mhm.
not profitable. And so you are then asking schools that might be smaller, might
Mhm.
have different financial obligations. They're like, oh, also, you need to fly the women's field hockey team
Right.
to Eugene and back on a
Right.
Tuesday. Also, they all have finals because they are college students. This is a real thing. And like, are you going to administer them those finals while they're out there? Or are they going to do it over here? Like, it's that I am concerned for the players. I am
Mhm.
not concerned for me and how I feel about college football. Like, I've now been through
It no,
a
I don't
lot of conference realignments. Like, I remember being annoyed when Nebraska joined the Big
right.
Ten and being like, come on. And now it's like, it's a thing. I'm used to it. But
No,
I
in
do
fact, I
think,
half expect us to have the realignment by geography. Like eventually the Big Ten is going to get so big. Hey, we're going to have divisions based on geography. So there'll be a
yeah,
Western division, a Southern
yeah,
division. Like you see that that's probably coming.
I mean, it kind of has to happen in a
Right.
way because it just at a certain point, like,
For what you're
the
just
Big Ten.
describing, so that you play a majority of your
Yeah, so,
of
like, you can
events
have
against
a couple.
geographically closer
Yeah,
teams. Yeah.
you can have, what we have long had. You could have, I mean, obviously, this wouldn't be non-conference, but you could have those early non-conference matchups, which notably certain SEC establishments try to avoid. But, like, Michigan's gonna play has I think, a home and home with
Mhm.
Oklahoma this year.
Right.
And that'll be fun. Two giant schools that
Mhm.
I don't think I've ever seen Michigan play Oklahoma.
Hey,
So like,
not outside a bowl game, that I
yeah,
can think of.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, I think that that'll be interesting, but it is funny how we are just kind of like slowly working ourselves backwards towards
Mhm.
regional conferences. And like the challenge though is for teams that are, those group of 5 teams, those teams that are not part of the Big Ten or the SEC, if you are like, we're going to have this debate 3 billion times
Yeah.
for the next whatever amount of time. But if you're an undefeated ACC team,
Right.
but you're undefeated in the ACC, and all the other, Big Ten and
Mhm.
SEC are like, what even is that?
Mm.
Like, are we just going to have the Florida State issue again? Are we just going to keep having teams where if they played in a different conference, everyone would
Yeah.
be like, oh my God, they're 14
Well, we
and
never
1.
had the Florida State issue because Florida State was not allowed to compete. So I would
Yes.
say if you're able to actually get this to do, here's the thing, there is no actual proof yet that somehow the ACC and the Big 12 are not as competitive as the
Right.
other two. There's just a presumption by the
Right.
arrogance of Greg Sankey to believe this, who I think singularly is destroying college football. That
Yeah,
man,
it's
it is,
having
and he
heard
doesn't
some of
want
the
to
remarks he
expand.
made.
He doesn't want
Yeah.
to expand the fan base. Like, he actually wants to narrow this is my beef. Look, God bless him that it's the dominant thing, but he has no interest in. I like the fact that Spokane has a football following. I like the fact that there are more. That's what made college football different from the NFL. It has fan bases in 250 media markets, not just 32. And it is actually an asset to the SEC that Spokane and Washington State exists. As far as he's concerned, it is not. Like, he wants to create Premier League 2, and you're just, at that point, you're creating just a less good version of the NFL, and we already have an NFL.
Yeah, we do. And I think also, like, the way in which, especially because conference dominance isn't a given.
No,
I was
of course
struck
it isn't.
by comments. I was struck by comments made by Alabama's head coach now, Kalen DeBoer, who was talking about, like, well, let's see how some of these other teams would have done with our schedule last year. And I'm like,
I'm so sick
probably
of that argument.
wouldn't have lost to Vanderbilt. But like, there is this an idea that, and I think that this is something that's happened within the SEC. They have seen turnover before. I remember when Alabama lost to the University of Louisiana Lafayette.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when that happened. That was like Nick Saban's first season. I know, like, there's turnover, there's churn. That's the way it's supposed to be. Like, you can have a USC that is unstoppable in 2005, 2006, and now is like, they've been kind of wandering in the desert for 20 years. So
well, that was the basis of this question then, and that's what I'm concerned about. If the energy of college football is basically the Midwest and South, even though there are teams living and breathing on the Pacific coast of the United States,
we respect the Palouse in this household.
Yeah,
like, it's very real.
But that's the concern I have, is that the further away college football retreats from the West Coast, that it becomes self-fulfilling, and that eventually college football will just be less popular in America's most populous state, which seems like a very bad idea if I were the czar of college football.
Right. I think that's a point of emphasis that needs to be made, because I think that there is a real concern that because I think, college football is made over time. It's created every single year, and it's created by recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at where kids are coming out of, like, your top 30, top 40 recruits who are going to the biggest programs, they are coming in general from the South. They're coming in general from the South. And, you used to, and I think you still do, like, California still has some powerhouse football high schools. Mater Dei is probably the best example.
Mm-hmm.
But if that stops and you stop having reasons for kids to come to USC or go to, San Diego State or something like that, like, I want to see California and West Coast schools be super competitive. And, that's why I'm like, I want UCLA to be really good. Yeah. I think that's fun when UCLA is good. For one thing, that, like, UCLA, what was that? Like 5 or 6 years ago, their quarterback, who then sadly, I believe, got drafted by the Giants and then disappeared into the ether.
Josh Rosen.
Yes, he ran a fake spike, and it was the greatest play I'd ever seen. And I was like, that's the funniest thing. It was a massive comeback victory, and he ran a fake spike, which is the kind of thing. That's another thing I love about college football, is that people will try things that in the NFL you would see.
Well,
I think,
you know how innovation works in football. It's literally bottom. It's the high school coaches innovate.
Yeah,
the college coaches copy it and hire these high school innovators. And then the NFL reluctantly goes ahead
Eventually,
right.
yeah.
All right, we'll run the spread offense because
Yeah, you have
everybody
that,
knows how to run it. Yeah.
The Dolphins will use the spread to beat the Patriots during Monday Night Football, and everyone's like, "Oh my god!"
Where
And
did
then
they
I'm like,
come up with that idea?
yeah, I'm
You're
like,
like,
they've been doing this in college for years. And then there's always like, a couple of schools probably most people haven't heard of. It's always like
Yeah.
Colorado School of Mines or something like that, where it's like, we don't punt.
Right.
We will never punt.
Right. The
and
non-punter.
it's just
high
like,
school.
I love that kind of innovation, but like, I want there to be
Mhm.
regional and national college football. And I think
Well,
that something
yeah.
that also, I mean, you have to talk about how television networks play into this, how the deals with
Fox and ESPN are
ESPN.
controlling college football. The two of them have all this control. And the irony is, I think we both look, especially Fox. I don't know about the future of Fox. You've got the whole Murdoch situation that at any point is going to become an issue. And I just don't know. We're going to find out during when the NFL opts out of its media deal. But that's going to be an interesting it's going to be an interesting moment for the Big Ten because how much, how deep really are Fox's pockets compared to Disney? And then what happens when Amazon, I mean, I remember talking with somebody about the Pac-12, the deal the Pac-12 turned down, when Oregon and Washington, and I can't remember the order of events, if it was Oregon was into it and Washington said no or vice versa, but they were sort of the two linchpins of it. And, there were some executives that looked at it and said, in like year 3 of that deal, the Pac-12 was going to end up with more money than the ACC and competitive with the SEC and the Big Ten, just the way Apple was financing that. And that seems to be where this is going. But, that's going to probably be another moment where there's potential shakeup.
Yeah, no, and you've seen this a little bit, and it's challenging again because this could be a moment in which we think this would be a great idea, and then it comes in 5 years, and everybody's like, "What what were you thinking with Apple?" Because I feel this way about Peacock, and the way that like there are specific Big Ten games that you can now only watch on Peacock, and everyone gets mad every single time.
Well, and it's always the Michigan-Illinois game. It's a game that only you care about. That they really don't want to put on regular NBC. No offense to my friends in Illinois yet. Who knows? Maybe they'll be more competitive this coming year. But it's always like they force a big brand name to play a lesser brand name.
Right. And but it's interesting also because Fox, I mean, thinking about brand names, they have been so focused on building up that noon game. They're, big noon Saturday or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it is interesting to me, and I think that this kind of gets to how Fox is trying to play the sports stuff and their other work, because Big Noon Saturday, one of the things that happens is that Clay Travis hosts a show that I'm assuming is observed by people. And it's interesting how they try to blend that. Like I happen to quite like Joel Klatt, Gus Johnson, even though they do every Michigan Ohio State game. They basically will do, if it's like a big game, they will do it. They get it, and they will get the numbers. They will get the numbers every time.
Sure.
Because Michigan is a draw. It just is. It's the same, Texas is a draw. Ohio State is a draw. Like some of these schools, they're just draws. It just happens. So one, it's interesting how they try to bring in some of their, like, Clay Travis kind of rides that line because he's, his radio show is he's replacing Rush Limbaugh. Right. But then he's also started out doing sports, started out doing, Outkick or whatever. But I also am curious for Fox, are they, because they'll put out their numbers every week. And they're always like, we got 17 million people to watch this this Ohio State hypothetical Texas game. We got 18 million people to watch Michigan play Ohio State, because of course you did. But again, did you get that because it's Michigan, Ohio State, or did Fox have anything to do with it at all? So it is interesting because I would be curious to look at what does it look like when Fox needs to build up, when it can't just rely on the fact that you've got this big game. When if Fox is doing, because I've actually watched some pretty solid like Nebraska, Indiana games, because Nebraska's trying to figure it out. Indiana has actually been quite competitive. Illinois was this past year as well, and so I'm just interested to see what that looks like, because so much of this, like, it seems so obvious to put college football on television and to make it make money. Like, it feels to me like it should be the easiest thing in the universe, and yet every year.
Well, this goes to the lack of again where. And I actually think this is a metaphor for where we are, right? Where people are so concerned about their narrow power that they want to keep. So take Greg Sankey. He wants to make the SEC this elite set of institutions that only, and shrink the number of teams that get to compete in the highest levels of college football, rather than saying, how do I expand? How do I grow? How do I make this even bigger, right? And in fact, if you took the TV deal, if college football negotiated their television contracts the way the NFL does, which basically says, hey, you come to us and we'll find a piece. And guess what? You're going to have to put Jacksonville on, whether you like it or not, if you want an opportunity at one Dallas game this year. You're going to have to put Colorado State on, if you would, and Miami of Ohio on, if you would like access to a Michigan game over here. You could actually you could make more money for everybody. More money for the MAC schools, more money for the WAC schools, more money for the Mountain West. Oh, and more money for the big schools as well. It's one of those cases where you could be the NFL here and essentially make everybody richer and bigger and wealthier. And what they're doing actually is limiting their ability collectively. So yes, the SEC can get a bigger TV deal, but they've actually limited the amount of money per school because they've screwed up the negotiating abilities of the rest of college football, where if they pooled all of their games into one thing, like the old College Football Association, they could get then 15 networks like the NFL does begging for a piece of the action.
Right. And I think that that's something where you have this idea that there's a limited money. And that there's this is a zero-sum game. And I just don't think it is. And I think that goes, as you mentioned, kind of a metaphor for how people are seeing media right now, where on the one hand, it does feel kind of like, you're scrambling, you're playing musical chairs, but musical chairs for your job and career.
Right.
But at the same time, also, there's so much out there. There's so much content that could be done. There's so many different ways to be doing this. It's okay if things are different.
Yeah.
It's okay if networks are doing different things. It's okay if people are trying different things. That's fine. Like, I'm definitely of the, let a million flowers bloom school on this. And I think that's, for college football purposes, like, after the Supreme Court basically said, like, you can put college football on Saturdays, like, I think that was a Supreme Court decision that basically was like, you guys figure it out. Yeah. You can do this. There's a way to do this, but everybody's terrified.
Well, you have the conference. There's no leadership, but we could keep going on that. I want to pivot a little bit.
Yeah.
Tell me more about how you decide what is worthy of a lead for you. Doing a daily show means you're on the news, but you don't have to be on top of the news. Right. You can be news adjacent. I think the same thing. I'm doing 2 or 3 days a week. I always say I got to be news adjacent. I don't have to be in the moment itself. So, what's a story that you will do and what's a story that you won't do because of how you want to steer this audience and steer this program?
Well, it's a decision I make every day. It's a decision we make because I have an absolutely fantastic team of producers who are thinking about this. And the nice thing is that, we do have, a headlines portion where we can talk about the news of the day. But also there's a lot of stuff where it's like, maybe people are missing what is actually going on in this debate about Medicaid. I'll give you an example specifically about Medicaid, in which you kept hearing from Republicans, like, we are funding able-bodied working men to sit on their couches. And, the rhetoric around Medicaid was the same rhetoric people have been using to talk about welfare or the concept of welfare since...
Oh, Medicaid and welfare. I'm going to be on it. Medicaid in the 80s was synonymous with welfare. But shouldn't have been, but it was rhetorically, and there's still a lot of Republicans who haven't lost that language, which is why they're having a hard time with
because when you say Medicaid, for the first thing is, in a lot of states, because of that, they don't call it Medicaid. In California, I believe it's Medi-Cal. So there are lots of people who might not even know that they are using Medicaid.
Right.
And especially because, we had a conversation last week about this on the show, where basically it works out that the majority of people on Medicaid are working. It's just that a lot of people don't have jobs that offer health insurance, or maybe those jobs, and if let's say you drive for DoorDash, If you go to
Right.
DoorDash, if you Google, does DoorDash offer health insurance? DoorDash will say, no, we don't. But here's this app we use where you can either go through the Affordable Care Act or you can get on Medicaid in your state.
Hmm.
And so you could go through the exchange, which might be pretty expensive for some people. I know, like looking at the exchange in California, pricey. Looking at the exchange in Utah, also pricey. But for a lot of people, Medicaid's going to be a better option. And it's, I don't know. I've worked a lot of shitty jobs in my
Hmm.
time. So I am a appreciator of people who work jobs that a
Right.
lot of times we don't talk about. We don't talk about
And
people
none
who
of them offer benefits.
they do not offer benefits, and their benefit is just drive a lot, and then maybe you can afford it on your own.
Right.
And there are people for whom Uber is their full-time job, DoorDash is their full-time job. They are, they're doing they might even have, I mean, you've probably seen this. There are people who drive for Uber and Lyft and a bunch of other companies too, and that's all they do.
Yep.
And so I think that that is a conversation. It was not 100% pegged to the news, but obviously
Sure.
adjacent to the news about like, what is this? What are we even talking about when we talk about Medicaid? So I think like I want our audience to feel informed.
Hmm.
I think also the fact that I have an audience that is, we get to hear from them and get to hear from our listeners all the time.
Hmm.
And there's I want our audience to feel like there's somebody who they can listen to because people listen to me every morning. That it's a
Right.
routine. But when you
Right.
do a daily show, you recognize that you are part of people's routine. And so I am not going to try and just blow everybody's minds with doing something that is like completely, totally out of left field. I want people to feel like they can come into the show and kind of an understanding that I'm on their side. I'm asking questions that they might be asking. I'm also going
Hmm.
to try and challenge them a little bit because I think that there are sometimes people come in with priors. Um, so, for example, I mean, even referencing this feels like it was from 3,000 years ago, but we had Josh Barrow on to talk about why he thought it was a good idea that Chuck Schumer went along with. I can't even remember what this debate was about, but
The government shutdown.
yes, the government shutdown. Thank
That he
you.
was that yeah. Well, that was a
Yeah,
case where I think Schumer probably came to the right political decision, but he communicated it so poorly that he ended
right.
up basically
Yeah,
harikari himself
yeah.
politically.
Everybody was mad.
Yeah.
And I was, I wanted to hear from a voice who I thought was smart to tell me why people should not be mad.
Hmm.
And I thought he made, I like when people are like, I disagreed with him, but I kind of understand where that perspective comes from. And so I want to offer that to my audience as well. Because I think that I am not going to do the thing where people, we have a lot of people right now who will do the thing like, no one else is telling you this, but I will.
Yeah.
Everybody's telling you everything all the time. If you want to hear a thing that you want to hear, you can go find it. But what I want to offer to listeners is to have someone be there to ask the right questions,
Hmm.
not just tell them things, but ask questions to other people that can
Hmm.
be informative.
Do you feel as if the algorithms work against you? I mean, and I say this in that the algorithms feel like they're so refined that it really, rewards your partisans and anybody who wants to be questioning anything. It algorithms struggle with that,
I
right?
think so.
And I think um it's one of the core problems with our online uh discourse in that it's at, again, these big tech companies who have claimed they're not publishers, but the minute they created an algorithm, they became a publisher. And I'm convinced if we went to court, we would win that fight. Because I think I just think it's beyond, I think the minute you create an algorithm, you've changed the nature of your relationship with your
Chuck,
users.
I love Section 230 like a member of my own family. So we
Yeah.
can have a separate conversation.
No, we could, but I just think
Yeah.
Section 230, it's like, I don't even think it may give them an exception, but the minute they create an algorithm, they've lost their exception. That's my argument. And I
understand.
actually think that hasn't been tested. And I think that at some point it could be if you wanted to do that. But the bigger issue is just that I think people are struggling to figure out they don't even realize how much they've been siloed away from competing viewpoints.
Right. And I think that part of that is there are a couple of concepts I think a lot about in terms of how to keep myself sane in this news environment.
Hmm.
And one is, yes, remembering the idea of algorithmic capture, remembering the fact that like things that do well online are not necessarily reflective of like real life.
Hmm.
Like, for example, I mean, I will not say that the internet is not real because it is obviously very real, but in terms of thinking about numbers, if you go on any social media site, you would come to believe that like, there are a lot more trad wives or kind of
How about
so-called
anti-vaxxers? There'd be a
yeah.
lot. Yeah, I mean, if you go
Yeah, but
online,
then
you
like you
think
look at
that
the actual
30% of America's
yeah, you look
anti-vax,
at
and
the
they're
actual
not.
numbers and it's like
Yeah,
not really.
right.
But there are two concepts. There is a Substacker and podcaster named I think Ethan Strauss who had two ideas. One is one that people have probably heard of, audience capture,
Hmm.
which is that you start doing something for an audience and then your audience rewards you the more you give it to them.
Hmm.
And that can drive pretty much anybody insane. But I
That's
would
cable.
also
That's
say
cable news. That's what
yes,
cable news allowed itself to become.
it drives everyone insane. But
Hmm.
there's also the idea of criticism capture. And that is when people permit themselves to be driven insane by their biggest critics. That they got yelled at enough times
Hmm.
that it drove them totally to a different direction or further into their metaphorical foxhole than they would
Hmm.
be in. And my goal in life is to avoid both of those things, both
Hmm.
being captured by an audience that tells me how great I am. And if I only just talked about these specific things I wanted to hear about, I would be even better.
Yeah.
But also, if someone offers criticism to me, I cannot allow myself to be driven insane by that. I cannot allow myself to become siloed in a different direction because someone got mad at me on the internet. Which is
Right.
it's a thing has happened to so many people, but
Well,
that is the thing I want to avoid.
I'm starting to wonder if the human psyche can't handle what the internet delivers.
Oh,
'Cause
I don't think we were meant to. I
yeah.
can't remember. I think it might have been Michelle Goldberg, the New York Times. She had a piece a while back that was like, we should all know each other less. And I don't think the human brain was meant to encounter this many different kinds of people. And I think also there's a Reddit there's a Reddit post I think about a lot. And I regret because it involves some swearing.
Mhm.
And the post is like, be into fucking toaster. Before the internet, you'd be into fucking toasters. People would be like, what's wrong with you? You'd stop fucking toasters. After the internet, you're into fucking toasters. You meet a bunch of people online who are into
Yeah.
fucking toasters. You accidentally develop a toaster fucking cult.
Yeah.
And now you have ruined your life.
Well,
and it's like,
Eli Pariser actually wrote a book about this 15 years ago, to his credit. And he used the 9/11 truthers as an example, where before the internet, before Google, essentially, you were a weirdo if you were a 9/11 truther. And then you go on Google and say, I think there's a conspiracy. You went to toasters. I'm going to go to 9/11.
Right.
I'm not saying, I'm just saying. But all of a sudden you can find fellow travelers, right?
Right.
In the conspiracies that somehow were involved in 9/11. And I think that's this is what big tech hasn't been able to figure out how to do. And this is where
I
the
also think,
algorithms, I think they're well-meaning. Some of them, like I have a friend of mine who runs the Substack on JFK. Okay. Jeff Morley. He's jfkfacts.com. He's the guy that he takes a journalistic approach. He's certainly a skeptic of what the government's done, but he takes a journalistic approach to everything that's been done about the JFK stuff. But it is considered conspiracy, and social media apps sort of drive down his ability to capture an audience when he's not a conspiracy-filled guy. He really is using it as a fact-based way to sort of try to unravel it, but he's treated by the algorithms as a conspiracy theorist and therefore pushed down, right?
right.
And this is what these big brains in tech haven't figured out how to do.
Right. And I mean, I think that's one of the challenges. It's like, there are people behind all of these decisions and people are fallible. That's how we're made. But I also think that one of the challenges that we have is trying to figure out, we are using the internet to find out what people not on the internet are thinking. And I think that's a fool's errand. That is an inherent, is a fool's errand.
Go outside and talk to people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's been, look, some of these after action reports on the campaign aren't talking to enough voters They're
Right.
literally just splicing things up. And it's like, talk to the voter.
Right.
Let's spend a little more time talking to the voter and get their reaction to all this.
Right. And I think like it's okay if you come to the conclusion, as I have, that
Mhm.
voters are really weird. Because they are, because individuals are weird. People can hold a lot of different political views at once. And I think that, after every election, there's always someone who's like, oh, yeah, I voted for Trump and I voted to preserve abortion access and I
Mhm.
voted to raise the minimum wage. And people are like, how could you do that? And I'm like, welcome to the state of Missouri. Like, that's, that is a real
Right.
thing that people are complicated. I mean, I think that that's something I've always liked about sports is that I have been able to go, I've been at sports bars in 10 states and I've watched a lot of Michigan football in a
Mhm.
lot of different places with a lot of different people who all disagree with me about pretty much everything except for Michigan football. I think,
Right.
I remember going to Michigan Maryland game and outside, people are tailgating because I don't
Mhm.
know if you know this, but University of Maryland students tailgate harder than I've ever seen anyone tailgate in my life. I
You haven't
genuinely
been
was
to
like,
You haven't been to Morgantown, and I'm no West Virginia lover.
no, I
But
have not been to Morgantown.
Morgantown is the more you really do drink out of mayonnaise jars.
Yep,
And
I
you
am
want to do that,
unsurprised,
and you should
and
go. And there
I
really
won't
are
lie
couches
when
that are lit on fire. So all those things are true.
I will not lie. Whenever I have a friend who's a West Virginia fan, and he sent me a video of everybody singing "Take Me Home, Country Roads" from that stadium, and I got choked up. And I'm like, that's what college football does to me. But
I've been on
I
the wrong
remember,
end of West Virginia games, but yes, they
no, I'm
are a
aware.
loving fan
But
base.
I remember going to this game, and there is a family, Michigan fans, and so they've got a
Mhm.
Michigan flag, a Trump flag, and a "Let's Go Brandon" flag.
Mm.
But, they offered me Jello shots, and we talked about the game, and we talked, this would have been 2021.
Mhm.
So I believe we had just watched, I think Maryland was playing Michigan the weekend that Michigan State was playing Ohio State, and then we were about to
Mm.
play Ohio State and ultimately win that game. But Ohio State decimated Michigan State. Like
Mm.
drove them into the ground. And I remember
Right.
like watching this game with these like big Trumpy Michigan fans, and we're all like, oh boy. But like it was it's not apolitical. Sports is political. I'm aware of that. But there was
Sure.
this moment where we were coming together across things where it didn't actually
Look, I
come
actually
up
think
or matter.
sports.
And I think that is something that's the
Look,
moment, you keep seeing people
yeah,
reporting about Democrats trying to reach out to men
yeah,
and which I think that the thing people are forgetting is that most people, Chuck, you and I are freaks.
yeah.
You and I are just weirdo freaks
Right.
who thinking about, I'm already kind of like, 2026 midterms, thinking about
Mhm.
like, okay, how many seats are here and what are we doing here? And
What do you
okay,
mean? The
about,
whole intro to this episode is going to be about 2026. So of
yeah,
course, yeah.
yeah, we're weird. Like that's a weird thing to do. There used
Right.
to be a time, and I sometimes long for this time. When I was interested in politics in like high school, that
Mm.
was weird. Like people like we were weird. I was
Yeah,
basically
I was weird for that.
I was long.
My government teacher loved me in
Yeah,
high
no.
school because
So
I
did
was the one that was paying attention.
my APUS history teacher thought I was amazing.
Yeah.
And then, everybody my age was like, it just turns out that I was, a child who longed to be 37 years old. But
Yeah.
I think that for most people, politics is not a hobby. And I think that that's good. I think political hobbyism is very bad. The way in which people think about politics, the way they think about sports, I'm like, I got to tell you, I have
Mm.
gotten way more enjoyment out of sports than politics in my life. But
No, I
think
mean,
that,
this is the worst version of it, is not to make, this is a complaint that people used to come at me thinking that I was helping to make politics too much like sports. And I understood that because I agree. I don't think it is. And in
right.
fact, we've got to, and this is where it's funny you say that most people aren't political hobbyists. I fear too many people have become political hobbyists.
Yes, I think that too many
and
people
my
have
thesis
become
is,
that way.
My thesis is we have too much time in our hands, that in general. And like, I think about 15 years ago, the average Saturday, I was probably in my car for 6 hours because I was running all these different errands. Maybe I was
Right.
finding the sports cleats for my kids, or having to go to Dick's or their Sports Authority, or go over
Yeah.
here or go over there. Now, of course, everything is just click, click, click,
Yeah.
and then you just wait for it. And then while you're waiting for the Amazon delivery, you go on social media and
And
text.
fight.
Yeah.
And you fight. I mean, I think that's the thing. I got online because I had to work on Memorial Day for a couple of
Hmm.
hours because to do the Tuesday show.
Right.
And you get online and people are fighting. And I'm like, go outside. You don't have to be here. Go outside. And so
I
I think
often
that
think about what's wrong in their life that they feel as if, today's a good day for me to call so-and-so a bunch of names and to pick a fight with these people. And it's like, man,
about something that
what's
is,
wrong with
to
your
me,
life?
markably policy is important. Politics is the road we take to try to get to policy. And like, that's how it should be, that we're actually supposed to be fighting about like,
Actually,
should we do this?
politics is what we created to avoid settling disputes with violence.
Exactly.
I mean,
And then-
actually, political debate is a way to avoid death and destruction. Believe
exactly. It's either this or dueling. But like,
Mhm.
I think that most people think about politics if it impacts their lives or if
Mhm.
they're asked about it directly. I mean, this is why any sort of polling about a political subject, I'm always kind of like, well, how did you ask the question? Like, what did,
Oh, I'm off
what-
on a tangent on that. You should see this question wording. There's a poll out in Texas that claims that there's this huge support for the vouchers, right?
Mhm.
But the way they asked the question was basically, well, what do you think of these education savings accounts? Well, the minute I hear the phrase savings account, I like savings accounts.
Yes, of course you do.
It was this terribly worded question.
It drives me nuts.
And it was actually, this was a Texas Southern University, so it wasn't like even I think this was a case, it wasn't intentional political hackery. Like sometimes it's intentional hackery with the polling. This wasn't intentional. They read the bill as it was, but the bill, the bill was written in a way to be PR, to not actually be, they didn't explain the issue very well. They just literally read the text of the bill, which had a bunch of PR language in it. So it is, anyway, it's made my blood vessel pop.
It drives me nuts. But I do think like for most people, their experience of politics is not like the way they talk or the way they live their lives. It's kind of like, they have lives and then politics occasionally gets in the way of that. Or they're trying to figure out how to do things and someone might promise them or say that they're going to do a thing that could help them. And they're like, okay, that sounds interesting. And so I think like the way in which you get, you reach out to people, to voters, is to think of them not as voters, but just think of them as like people with interests, people with, differing interests. Occasionally we do this thing where we're like, oh, like we only care about kitchen table issues. And I'm like, well, the thing about the idea of the kitchen table issue is that at my kitchen table growing up, we talked about pretty much everything. Like we talked about everything from, my parents are, my mom passed away last month, but obviously when I was growing up, we would talk about everything from something going on at church, parish council drama, to my dad's memories of seeing Bob Marley live in like 1977 in Chicago. And so like what a kitchen table issue is, there's this way we talk about like, oh, this is a real issue. This isn't a real issue. This is a
like
culture war issue.
real Americans versus
the fake people
fake
or something
Americans,
like it's,
everyday Americans versus the every other day Americans.
Yes, yes. Tuesday Americans, but not Thursday Americans. So I think like thinking of voters like people who are interested, there are lots of people for whom politics is this opaque wall that you feel like you need
very
to
inaccessible.
I mean, that's inaccessible.
I've always wanted to try to make it more accessible because I think it's easier to access than folks realize.
Right, exactly. And I think that that's something that is really irritating to me, in which when you make political hobbyism, such a thing, you make politics less accessible to people because they feel as if they want to get engaged in politics, they have to do the whole thing. That has to be all they talk about. They have to be one of those people who only posts, like gets mad at you if you post about non-politics. You're like, how could you be thinking about this at a time like this?
How dare you think about Michigan football when there are kids starving somewhere in the world?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm
Who
like,
are you? What's wrong with you?
Like, just, that's all, you have to perform being mad all the time.
Performance
and
theater.
like that I think the performativity, it really bothers me.
All right, I'm going to get you out of here on this. Where are you on the level of Biden coverage and the level of media culpability in Biden? And I say this in that I'm somebody who thinks that blaming the media is usually those that want to put this almost all on the press are usually those that are just trying to destroy the press for other reasons.
Right.
Versus this being, to me, what it really is a Democratic Party issue. But I accept that there were certainly some members of the media who were overtly defensive of Biden, perhaps to protect their own access. So that's sort of where I come down on this. I'm curious where you come down on this, and more importantly, how important of an issue do you think it's going to be for folks that were in the Biden administration, including the vice president?
I think I have a couple of views on this.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them conflict, and I'm aware of that because I'm still kind of working through this.
Mm-hmm.
One, I think that how we are the media, we are interested in this because it impacts us. Mm-hmm. We are admittedly very self-involved people. It's just how we are. Industries, it's an industry conversation that is happening among people in an industry. How voters feel about it is going to be different than how we will think about it. I think, for example, there is polling that came out from YouGov, I think today, that talked about how voters in general want more health information on people running for office. Great, fine,
pretty
totally
logical.
fine with that. That's a logical thing to want. We don't need to be like.
By the way, that's what makes me feel better about our information ecosystem when voters respond pretty logically to something.
I'm like,
you're
yes,
like,
obviously you would like.
We need more medical information because we have too many old people.
More medical information, and that totally makes sense to me. We are not the kings of yore. We do not need to worry. We don't have dynasties. That's not how this works. People want more information. Totally get it. I think what the impact will be for people who were in the administration, I think that really depends on what those people do. So, for instance, I'm aware that there are a bunch of Republicans who have gotten themselves really psyched up for the idea that Kamala Harris is going to run for governor of California. Mm-hmm. They're very excited about this. However, the challenge will be that she is running to be governor of California, not president of the United States. And that is, state level gubernatorial elections, especially in California, a state that is, not as blue as people think, but the blue population centers are very blue. It's going to be how people feel about it nationally and how people feel about it regionally are going to be different things. I think that there is a degree I think that in terms of media culpability, again, this is a media thing talking about media. In general, when I talk to people about this who are not in media, they are like, yeah, we knew Biden was old. You did not need to tell us this.
Well, that's my frustration. Voters were screaming about this in the polling.
Yeah, voters were saying that's the thing.
And you know who was conducting the polls? Us in the media who were forcing this question onto surveys because we knew it was an issue.
People kept saying, that was not a hidden thing. And I think that there is a type of, and I get this. I understand the people who were like, yes, Biden's old. I'm aware of that. I'm fine with it. Stop yelling at me. Mm-hmm. Stop talking. This idea also, I think that one of the challenges you also have is that you are not talking about Joe Biden being old in a vacuum. You're talking about Joe Biden being old versus Donald Trump, who attempted to stage an insurrection. I think that there are a bunch of people, there is I understand.
Well, as Joe Biden liked to used to say, don't judge me by the almighty, judge me by the alternative.
Exactly. And now, however, that is not an excuse for anything. That is not an excuse for having essentially the quote unquote Politburo be running things in an administration. I will say it is kind of funny. And my former colleague Matthew Iglesias pointed this out that there was this idea of the Biden administration was just run by left wing radicals. And then it turns out that it was actually run by normie Democrats, which is lightly funny to me. But I do think that you had people saying this person is too old. You had Biden himself essentially saying I am here to pass the torch to the next generation. And then he had the same thing. If you have ever encountered an elderly person in your life where they're like, I'm fine. Yeah. I'm doing great, because that's how age works. That's how people work. So you had people, a person who believed he could fully do the job and actually was the only person who could do the job. The job being defeat Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. You had people around him who, as far as I can tell, let him think that and kept going with it. and basically tried to keep away anyone else who could tell him otherwise. And then you had voters who were like,
What are you
you
doing here,
know,
dude?
what
Yeah.
what's going on here? We're going to keep
Right.
saying you're too old for this. This is making us anxious. And people not listening to that third group of people. And I think that the challenge for media is I don't want to get like the reclamations right now. It feels very much like it's excessive. Like
Oh,
it's not that
it
it's
like I said, it to me it exposes. I always say this, I don't take anybody with bias who charges bias seriously, because you're biased. You're not a fair arbiter of this at all. And like I said, most of the criticism of the press is coming from people who have their own alternative media that they're trying to promote as a replacement for this. So it's sort of, they have their own business interests at it. And so that's why it's like, to me, the original sin is not listening to the voters. The
right. And I
voters
think the
complained
voters
about
said,
this from the
the
beginning.
voters were saying like this person's too old. The voters were saying like we like some of these things. Like they're, I think that the actual story to me of the Biden administration is that he had a concept of deliverism of like, you said you wanted this, we're going to do this. You said you wanted this from unions wanted this, we're going to do this. But he was too old to articulate like what
He couldn't
was
do that
doing.
part of the job, which
Like
to me is part of the job.
pulpit matters. Like
Yes,
there's a version of Biden, a theoretical Biden, who is doing this when he's 55
Sure.
and who is like
Traveling
running
the country.
around,
Yeah.
running around at every single,
Union Hall. You could see
Union-
it. You know what it was called? It was called the Clinton presidency. It was called the
Exactly.
Obama presidency,
Yeah,
right?
it's
when
like,
you
this
saw a
is what it looks
president
like when you're showing
travel
up-
the country
when
to
you're showing
sell
up all the
their,
time
right.
and you're selling it, and you don't have to rely on the results to sell it, because people are, we've seen this again and again, how
Right.
voters can totally disconnect between the person who did the thing and the results of the thing. And so I think that that's the challenge here, is that people didn't listen to voters. It is not, to me, about yelling at media, because that's not interesting. What it is about, to me, is people saying like, I know what the voters are saying, but also these people are really annoying to me, so I'm just not going to listen to them. Like, we need to do a better job of listening to voters. The challenge is nobody wants to do that. Even the people who say like Americans agree. No, they don't. Look it up. They don't agree. So like, listen to voters and think about, how can we put forward policies that make sense to voters, and then sell it to voters. And then voters will say, I like it, I don't like it. Here's why. You look at those numbers. You say, either we're going to go with the voters on this, or we're like, actually, no, we're going to say this is the right thing to do. And we're going to, we'll suffer the political heat from doing that, but we'll know we were right. There are so many alternatives than just a media circle jerk.
As every conversation I have with you, I always feel I can go another hour, but I am mindful of your time, mindful of my time.
Thank you so much.
We can't do that, but I will ask you this one question.
Yeah.
Is, how hot is the seat under the still newish head coach of Michigan? I mean, I say this because in this day and age of, if you make the playoff, you've had a successful season, and if you haven't, you haven't. What's the level of patience
I
these
think
days?
we're actually, people are feeling good. The recruiting has been fantastic. Bringing in number one quarterback prospect, a guy who people are talking about the spring game. I mean, it's a spring game. Everybody sounds like they're doing Pravda level propaganda when you talk about the spring game.
Oh, you want to talk
Everybody's
about
taller and stronger.
access journalism, college football journalists. Oh my God!
I will say though that I've
they all just
experienced
feed
what
off
it's.
of it.
I've
Yeah.
experienced what it's like when you're with like a smaller program, and you like people get away with things where you just couldn't do that. Like, if you, I lived in Utah, lived in Salt Lake City, and Cam Rising basically didn't play and now has retired from football. And
that would be a huge story in a Southern school or a Midwestern
Oh my God.
school.
But
Yeah,
the year I was
100%.
there, we ran in like, it was the Oregon State game, which was
Every
several
week,
months into
Cam
the
Rising
season.
was.
Yeah,
Plus me,
and
I'm a gambler. Every
the
week is
Utah
Cam Rising
media-
playing? Yeah.
Yeah, the Utah media was like, I don't know, he might play. And I'm like, I don't think he's going to play. But anyway, so I think your actual question was, how is everybody feeling? The vibes are remarkably good, because we had the most hilarious month in, I think, Michigan football history, where, you beat Northwestern like you should. Then you go to Columbus, beat the eventual national champions 13-10 in the zenith of comedy.
Absolutely.
One of the
It was
most
such it was a fitting
It was,
it somehow was fitting.
it restored me in a way I didn't know I needed to be restored. And then, we win our bowl game against Alabama in a monsoon. And during all of this, we've picked up #1 quarterback recruit, and the recruiting seems to be really good. Like, I think that the thing I'm a little worried about is running back, but I think like the, plug and play offensive line, I feel good about. I think that in terms of like the hot seat or something like that, I think Sharon's fine. I think that there's a lot of latitude people have been willing to give him, given that you had Harbaugh leave, right, basically after the national championship, because he did what he said he was going to do.
Right.
You had, the continuity, the players wanted Sharon.
Right.
The players wanted Sharon. You had that continuity. You had no quarterback.
As a Miami fan, I will tell you that works until it doesn't work.
Oh,
players
no, I'm aware. I'm aware. And that's the thing. I think
it didn't go so well.
The lack of the quarterback, to go 8-5 while having, as far as I could tell, not one quarterback on the roster.
I know, but you had the best quarterback name in college football. Everybody wanted to have an orgy.
It's true.
In Michigan over, and it was just such a disappointment that orgy was not a lot of fun. And that's what you hear about orgy, is that sometimes it doesn't live up to the hype.
It happens. But I'm feeling good. Good. That is how I'm feeling about Sharon Moore and his position at Michigan.
Well, it's as always, I can't wait for college football to start. I wish college football had a scheduling reveal. I wish college football had these weird things that the NFL has somehow creeped into our life.
Believe me. Already I'm like, let's get those previews going. Let's do it. Let's do it. All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chuck.
Jane, this was a pleasure. Good luck.
Thank you.